At one time the Senate having decreed Caesar some extravagant honors, the consuls and praetors, attended by the whole body of patricians, went to inform him of what they had done. When they came, he did not rise to receive them, but kept his seat, as if they had been persons in a private station, and his answer to their address was that there was more need to retrench his honors than to enlarge them. This haughtiness gave pain not only to the Senate but the people, who thought the contempt of that body reflected dishonor upon the whole commonwealth, for all who could decently withdraw went off greatly dejected. Perceiving the false step he had taken, he retired immediately to his own house, and, laying his neck bare, told his friends he was ready for the first hand that would strike. He then bethought himself of alleging his distemper as an excuse, and asserted that those who are under its influence are apt to find their faculties fail them when they speak standing, a trembling and giddiness coming upon them, which bereave them of their senses. This, however, was not really the case, for it is said he was desirous to rise to the Senate. But Cornelius Balbus, one of his friends, or rather flatterers, held him, and had servility enough to say, "Will you not remember that you are Caesar, and suffer them to pay their court to you as their superior?" These discontents were greatly increased by the indignity with which he treated the tribunes of the people. In the Lupercalia, which, according to most writers, is an ancient pastoral feast, and which answers in many respects to the Lycia among the Arcadians, young men of noble families, and indeed many of the magistrates, run about the streets naked, and by way of diversion strike all they meet with leathern thongs with their hair upon them. Numbers of women of the first quality put themselves in their way, and present their hands for stripes, as scholars do to a master, being persuaded that the pregnant gain an easy delivery by it, and that the barren are enabled to conceive. Caesar wore a triumphal robe that day, and seated himself in a golden chair upon the rostra to see the ceremony. Antony rang among the first, in compliance with the rules of the festival, for he was consul. When he came into the forum, and the crowd had made a way for him, he approached Caesar, and offered him a diadem, wreathed with laurel. Upon this some plaudits were heard, but very feeble, because they proceeded only from persons placed there on purpose. Caesar refused it, and then the plaudits were loud and general. Antony presented it once more, and few applauded his officiousness. But when Caesar rejected it again, the applause again was general. Caesar, undeceived by his second trial, rose up and ordered the diadem to be consecrated in the Capitol. A few days after, his statues were seen adorned with royal diadems, and Flavius and Marulus, two of the tribunes, went and tore them off. They also found out the persons who first saluted Caesar king, and committed them to prison. The people followed with cheerful acclamations, and called them Brutuses, because Brutus was the man who expelled the kings and put the government in the hands of the Senate and people. Caesar, highly incensed at their behavior, disposed the tribunes, and by way of reprimand to them, as well as an insult to the people, called them several times brutes and Cumseans. Upon this, many applied to Marcus Brutus, who, by the father's side, was supposed to be a descendant of that ancient Brutus, and whose mother was of the illustrious house of the Servili. He was also nephew and son-in-law to Cato. No man was more inclined than he to lift his hand against monarchy, but he was withheld by the honors and favors he had received from Caesar, who had not only given him his life after the defeat of Pompey at Pharsalia and pardoned many of his friends at his request, but continued to honor him with his confidence. That very year he had procured him the most honorable praetorship, and he had named him for the consulship 4 years after, in preference to Cassius, who was his competitor, on which occasion Caesar is reported to have said, "Cassius assigns the strongest reasons, but I cannot refuse Brutus." Some impeached Brutus after the conspiracy was formed, but instead of listening to them, he laid his hands on his body and said, "Brutus will wait for this skin," intimating that though the virtue of Brutus rendered him worthy of empire, he would not be guilty of any ingratitude or baseness to obtain it. Those, however, who were desirous of a change kept their eyes upon him only, or principally at least, and as they durst not speak out plain, they put billets night after night in the tribunal and seat which he used as praetor, mostly in these terms: "Thou sleepest, Brutus," or "Thou art not Brutus." Cassius, perceiving his friend's ambition, a little stimulated by these papers, began to ply him closer than before and spur him on to the great enterprise, for he had a particular enmity against Caesar. Caesar, too, had some suspicion of him, and he even said one day to his friends, "What think you of Cassius? I do not like his pale looks." Another time, when Antony and Dolabella were accused of some designs against his person and government, he said, "I have no apprehensions from those fat and sleek men. I rather fear the pale and lean ones," meaning Cassius and Brutus. It seems from this instance that fate is not so secret as it is inevitable, for we are told there were strong signs and presages of the death of Caesar. As to the lights in the heavens, the strange noises heard in various quarters by night, and the appearance of solitary birds in the forum, perhaps they deserve not our notice in so great an event as this. But some attention should be given to Strabo the philosopher. According to him, there were seen in the air men of fire encountering each other. Such a flame appeared to issue from the hand of a soldier's servant that all the spectators thought it must be burned. Yet, when it was over, he found no harm, and one of the victims, which Caesar offered, was found without a heart. The latter was certainly a most alarming prodigy, for, according to the rules of nature, no creature can exist without a heart. What is still more extraordinary, many report that a certain soothsayer forewarned him of a great danger which threatened him on the Ides of March, and that when the day was come, as he was going to the Senate house, he called to the soothsayer and said, laughing, "The Ides of March are come." To which he answered softly, "Yes, but they are not gone." The evening before, he supped with Marcus Lepidus, and signed, according to custom, a number of letters, as he sat at table. While he was so employed, there arose a question: what kind of death was best? And Caesar, answering before them all, cried out, "A sudden one." The same night, as he was in bed with his wife, the doors and windows of the room flew open at once. Disturbed both with the noise and the light, he observed, by moonshine, Calpurnia in a deep sleep, uttering broken words and inarticulate groans. She dreamed that she was weeping over him, and she held him, murdered, in her arms. Others say she dreamed that the pinnacle was fallen, which, as Livy tells us, the Senate had ordered to be erected upon Caesar's house by way of ornament and distinction, and that it was the fall of it which she lamented and wept for. Be that as it may, the next morning she conjured Caesar not to go out that day if he could possibly avoid it, but to adjourn the Senate, and if he had no regard to her dreams, to have recourse to some other species of divination or to sacrifices for information as to his fate. This gave him some suspicion and alarm, for he had never known before in Calpurnia anything of the weakness or superstition of her sex, though she was now so much affected. He therefore offered a number of sacrifices, and as the diviners found no suspicious tokens in any of them, he sent Antony to dismiss the Senate. In the meantime, Decius Brutus, surnamed Albinus, came in. He was a person in whom Caesar placed such confidence that he had appointed him his second heir, yet he was engaged in the conspiracy with the other Brutus and Cassius. This man, fearing that if Caesar adjourned the Senate to another day the affair might be discovered, laughed at the diviners and told Caesar he would be highly to blame if by such a slight he gave the Senate an occasion of complaint against him. For they were met, he said, at his summons, and came prepared with one voice to honor him with the title of king in the provinces, and to grant that he should wear the diadem both by sea and land everywhere out of Italy. But if anyone go and tell them now they have taken their places, they must go home again, and return when Calpurnia happens to have better dreams. What room will your enemies have to launch out against you? Or who will hear your friends when they attempt to show that this is not an open servitude on the one hand and tyranny on the other? If you are absolutely persuaded that this is an unlucky day, it is certainly better to go yourself and tell them you have strong reasons for putting off business till another time. So saying, he took Caesar by the hand and led him out. He was not gone far from the door when a slave, who belonged to some other person, attempted to get up to speak to him, but finding it impossible, by reason of the crowd that was about him, he made his way into the house, and putting himself into the hands of Calpurnia, desired her to keep him safe till Caesar's return, because he had matters of great importance to communicate. Artemidorus the Cnidian, who, by teaching the Greek eloquence, became acquainted with some of Brutus's friends, and had got intelligence of most of the transactions, approached Caesar with a paper explaining what he had to discover. Observing that he gave the papers as fast as he received them to his officers, he got up as close as possible and said, "Caesar, read this to yourself, and quickly, for it contains matters of great consequence and of the last concern to you." He took it and attempted several times to read it, but was always prevented by one application or another. He therefore kept the paper, and that only, in his hand when he entered the house. Some say it was delivered to him by another man, Artemidorus being kept from approaching him all the way by the crowd. These things might, indeed, fall out by chance, but as in the place where the Senate was that day assembled, and which proved the scene of that tragedy, there was a statue of Pompey, and it was in edifice which Pompey had consecrated for an ornament to his theater, nothing can be clearer than that some deity conducted the whole business, and directed the execution of it to that very spot. Even Cassius himself, though inclined to the doctrines of Epicurus, turned his eye to the statue of Pompey, and secretly invoked his aid before the great attempt. The arduous occasion, it seems, overruled his former sentiments, and laid them open to all the influence of enthusiasm. Antony, who was a faithful friend to Caesar, and a man of great strength, was held in discourse without by Brutus Albinus, who had contrived a long story to detain him. When Caesar entered the house, the Senate rose to do him honor. Some of Brutus's accomplices came up behind his chair, and others before it, pretending to intercede, along with Metilius Cimber, for the recall of his brother from exile. They continued their instances till he came to his seat. When he was seated, he gave them a positive denial. And as they continued their importunities with an air of compulsion, he grew angry. Cimber then, with both hands, pulled his gown off his neck, which was the signal for the attack. Casca gave him the first blow. It was a stroke upon the neck with his sword, but the wound was not dangerous, for in the beginning of so tremendous an enterprise he was probably in some disorder. Caesar therefore turned upon him and laid hold of his sword. At the same time they both cried out, the one in Latin, "Villain, Casca, what dost thou mean?" and the other in Greek, to his brother, "Brother, help!" After such a beginning, those who knew nothing of the conspiracy were seized with consternation and horror, insomuch that they durst neither fly nor assist, nor even utter a word. All the conspirators now drew their swords, and surrounded him in such a manner that, whatever way he turned, he saw nothing but steel gleaming in his face, and met nothing but wounds, like some savage beast attacked by the hunters. He found every hand lifted against him, for they all agreed to have a share in the sacrifice and a taste of his blood. Therefore Brutus himself gave him a stroke in the groin. Some say he opposed the rest, and continued struggling and crying out till he perceived the sword of Brutus. Then he drew his robe over his face and yielded to his fate. Either by accident or pushed thither by the conspirators, he expired on the pedestal of Pompey's statue, and dyed it with his blood, so that Pompey seemed to preside over the work of vengeance, to tread his enemy under his feet, and to enjoy his agonies. Those agonies were great, for he received no less than 23 wounds, and many of the conspirators wounded each other as they were aiming their blows at him. Caesar thus dispatched, Brutus advanced to speak to the Senate and to assign his reasons for what he had done, but they could not bear to hear him. They fled out of the house and filled the people with inexpressible horror and dismay. Some shut up their houses, others left their shops and counters. All were in motion. One was running to see the spectacle, another running back. Antony and Lepidus, Caesar's principal friends, withdrew and hid themselves in other people's houses. Meantime Brutus and his confederates, yet warm from the slaughter, marched in a body with their bloody swords in their hands from the Senate house to the Capitol, not like men that fled, but with an air of gaiety and confidence, calling the people to liberty, and stopping to talk with every man of consequence whom they met. There were some who even joined them and mingled with their train, desirous of appearing to have had a share in the action, and hoping for one in the glory. Of this number were Caius Octavius and Lentulus Spinther, who afterward paid dear for their vanity, being put to death by Antony and young Caesar, so that they gained not even the honor for which they lost their lives, for nobody believed that they had any part in the enterprise, and they were punished not for the deed, but for the will. Next day, Brutus and the rest of the conspirators came down from the Capitol and addressed the people, who attended to their discourse without expressing either dislike or approbation of what was done, but by their silence it appeared that they pitied Caesar, at the same time that they revered Brutus. The Senate passed a general amnesty, and to reconcile all parties, they decreed Caesar divine honors and confirmed all the acts of his dictatorship, while on Brutus and his friends they bestowed governments, and such honors as were suitable, so that it was generally imagined the commonwealth was firmly established again, and all brought into the best order. But when, upon the opening of Caesar's will, it was found that he had left every Roman citizen a considerable legacy, and they beheld the body as it was carried through the forum, all mangled with wounds, the multitude could no longer be kept within bounds. They stopped the procession, and tearing up the benches, with the doors and tables, heaped them into a pile, and burned the corpse there. Then, snatching flaming brands from the pile, some ran to burn the houses of the assassins, while others ranged the city to find the conspirators themselves and tear them in pieces. But they had taken such care to secure themselves that they could not meet with one of them. One Cinna, a friend of Caesar's, had a strange dream the preceding night. He dreamed, as they tell us, that Caesar invited him to supper, and upon his refusal to go, caught him by the hand and drew him in after him, in spite of all the resistance he could make. Hearing, however, that the body of Caesar was to be burned in the Forum, he went to assist in doing him the last honors, though he had a fever upon him, the consequence of his uneasiness about his dream. On his coming up, one of the populace asked who that was, and having learned his name, told it to his next neighbor. A report immediately spread through the whole company that it was one of Caesar's murderers, and indeed one of the conspirators was named Cinna. The multitude, taking this for the man, fell upon him and tore him to pieces upon the spot. Brutus and Cassius were so terrified at this rage of the populace that a few days after they left the city. An account of their subsequent actions, sufferings, and death may be found in the life of Brutus. Caesar died at the age of 56 and did not survive Pompey above 4 years. His object was sovereign power and authority, which he pursued through innumerable dangers, and by prodigious efforts he gained it at last. But he reaped no other fruit from it than an empty and invidious title. It is true the divine power which conducted him through life attended him after his death as his avenger, pursued and hunted out the assassins over sea and land, and rested not till there was not a man left, either of those who dipped their heads in his blood or of those who gave their sanction to the deed. The most remarkable of natural events relative to this affair was that Cassius, after he had lost the battle of Philippi, killed himself with the same dagger which he had made use of against Caesar. And the most signal phenomenon in the heavens was that of a great comet, which shone very bright for 7 nights after Caesar's death, and then disappeared. To which we may add the fading of the sun's luster, for his orb looked pale all that year. He rose not with a sparkling radiance, nor had the heat he afforded its usual strength. The air, of course, was dark and heavy, for want of that vigorous heat which clears and rarefies it. And the fruits were so crude and unconcocted that they pined away and decayed through the chillness of the atmosphere. We have a proof still more striking that the assassination of Caesar was displeasing to the gods in the phantom that appeared to Brutus. The story of it is this. Brutus was on the point of transporting his army from Abydos to the opposite continent, and the night before he lay in his tent awake, according to custom, and in deep thought about what might be the event of the war, for it was natural for him to watch a great part of the night, and no general ever required so little sleep. With all his senses about him, he heard a noise at the door of his tent, and, looking toward the light, which was now burned very low, he saw a terrible appearance in the human form, but of prodigious stature and the most hideous aspect. At first he was struck with astonishment, but when he saw it neither did nor spoke anything to him, but stood in silence by his bed, he asked it who it was. The spectre answered, "I am thy evil genius, Brutus. Thou shalt see me at Philippi." Brutus answered boldly, "I'll meet thee there," and the spectre immediately vanished. Some time after, he engaged Antony and Octavius Caesar at Philippi, and the first day was victorious, carrying Gaul before him, where he fought in person and even pillaging Caesar's camp. The night before he was to fight the second battle, the same spectre appeared to him again, but spoke not a word. Brutus, however, understood that his last hour was near, and courted danger with all the violence of despair. Yet he did not fall in the action, but seeing all was lost, he retired to the top of a rock, where he presented his naked sword to his breast, and a friend, as they tell us, assisting the thrust, he died upon the spot.